The day I found out my own brother had opened 3 credit cards in my name and run up $94,000 in debt, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the collection notice in my hand, and I smiled, not because anything was funny, but because somewhere deep down, a part of me had always known this day was coming. Let me back up. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I work as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio. I have a good credit score, or I did. I have a small but clean apartment, a second-hand car that runs fine, and a savings account I've been building for 4 years toward a down payment on a house. I am, by every measure, the stable one in my family. And in my family, being the stable one is not a compliment, it's a target. My brother is 35. 4 years older than me, and you'd think 4 years wiser, but you'd be wrong. He has a talent for starting things. Businesses, relationships, arguments, and an equal talent for walking away from them the moment they require actual work. He's charming in the way that only truly dangerous people are, effortlessly, instinctively, without ever meaning to turn it off. Growing up, he was my parents' son. Everything orbited around him. His baseball games, his college applications, his potential. My parents talked about his potential the way some people talk about God, with total faith and zero evidence. I was the moon, visible sometimes, useful for the tides, otherwise ignored. That's not bitterness talking. That's just the architecture of our family, and I made peace with it a long time ago. I stopped expecting equal treatment sometime around my 16th birthday, when my parents pulled me aside and explained, gently, carefully, as if delivering news about a terminal illness, that my brother's private school tuition had used up what they'd saved for my college. "You're resourceful," my mother said, squeezing my hand. "You'll figure it out." And I did. I worked 2 jobs through state school. I graduated with modest debt and paid it off in 3 years. I figured it out. My brother, meanwhile, dropped out of the business degree my parents sacrificed for, moved back home at 28, launched what he called a lifestyle brand that sold approximately nothing and was celebrated at every family dinner like a man quietly assembling a masterpiece. I loved him anyway. That's the part I have to be honest about because it matters for what came later. He was my brother. When we were kids, he used to sneak me extra Halloween candy and cover for me when I missed curfew. There was a version of him I still believed in, even when the evidence kept telling me to stop. That belief is what they used against me. It started 2 years ago. He called me on a Tuesday night, voice low and urgent the way it got when he needed something. He said his business was on the verge of a breakthrough. He'd landed a potential investor, but he needed to show liquidity. He needed to put some expenses on a card for 60 days, 90 tops, and then he'd pay it off completely. He just needed me to add him as an authorized user on one of my credit cards. I said no. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Claire, I'm your brother." I said, "I know. That's why I'm being honest with you. I can't do that." He sighed the sigh of a man deeply disappointed in the smallness of the people around him, and we hung up. 3 days later, my mother called. She said she'd heard I'd refused to help my brother during a critical moment in his career. She said she was surprised by my decision. She said our family had always supported each other. I pointed out as calmly as I could that I had supported this family for a decade and a half and that adding someone with no income and no financial track record to my credit account was not something I was willing to do. My mother said, "You've always been so rigid." She said it the way you'd say, "You've always had one leg shorter than the other." A diagnosis, a limitation to be accommodated. We got off the phone, and I went back to my evening. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known then, was that the conversation was already over. The decision had already been made. Without me. 8 months later, I got a fraud alert from my credit monitoring app at 7:14 on a Wednesday morning. A credit card I didn't recognize had just been used at a Home Depot in Cincinnati for $3,400. I sat up in bed and opened the full alert. The card had been opened 6 months earlier. The billing address was mine. The Social Security number was mine. The Social Security number was mine. The name on the account was mine, with my middle initial included. The way I sign legal documents. I pulled up my full credit report before I even got out of bed. 3 cards. Combined limit of $110,000. Current balance, $94,200. The oldest account had been open for 6 months. Every payment had been made on time until 3 weeks ago when they all stopped simultaneously. I knew immediately. I didn't wonder, didn't second guess, didn't tell myself there must be some other explanation. I knew the way you know when you touch a hot stove. Fast, total, and irreversible. I put my phone face down on the mattress and sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then I got up, made coffee, and started making a list. I want to be clear about something, because I've told this story to a few people and the question I always get is, why didn't you call him right away? And the answer is that I'd watched enough of my family's patterns to know that calling my brother first would have been the single most destructive thing I could do. He would deny it. He would be wounded by the accusation. He would call my parents. My parents would call me. By nightfall, I would somehow be the villain, and my brother would have had 12 hours to do whatever people do when they need to cover their tracks. So I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone in my family. I made my list, I drank my coffee, and I moved in silence. First, I called each of the 3 credit card companies. I reported every account as fraudulent. I walked through the fraud department process with each one, gave them my information, confirmed I had not authorized these accounts, and requested that they begin their investigation. 2 of the 3 immediately froze the accounts. The third said they needed to verify my identity further before taking action, which I found astonishing, but accepted. I made notes of every representative's name and the timestamp of every call. Second, I called my bank and placed a fraud alert on my existing accounts and requested a new debit card number. I also asked them to note the fraud alert on my file. Third, I went online and placed a credit freeze on my file at all 3 major bureaus. This took approximately 25 minutes total. Once the freezes were in place, no new credit could be opened in my name without my explicit unfreeze. Fourth, and this was the part where my hands started to shake, just slightly, I called the non-emergency line for the Columbus Police Department and filed a fraud and identity theft report. I told them I believed I knew the individual responsible. They gave me a report number and told me a detective would follow up within 48 hours. The whole process, start to finish, took 4 hours. I went to work. I know that sounds strange. I know most people would expect that on the day you discover your brother stole your identity and racked up nearly $100,000 in your name, you'd fall apart. And I did, eventually. But not that day. That day, I was running on something cold and clear, a kind of focused calm I'd never quite felt before. Like my body had been waiting for a crisis it actually knew how to handle. The detective called the next morning. His name was Reyes, and he had the flat, unhurried voice of someone who has heard every version of every story. He asked me to walk him through everything. I did. I told him about my brother's request 2 years earlier, the phone call, my refusal. I told him about the timing of the accounts, the billing address, the social. He asked if I had any documentation of previous financial interactions with my brother. I said I had text messages going back several years and bank transfer records showing money I had lent him, voluntarily, knowingly, over the course of our adult relationship. He said those would be helpful. He asked me to come in and give a formal statement. I went in that afternoon. I sat across from Detective Reyes in a small room with fluorescent lighting, and I gave my statement. I brought printed copies of my credit reports, the fraud alert confirmations, screenshots of every relevant text message, and a timeline I had typed up the night before. He looked at the timeline and then looked at me. "You put this together last night." "Yes," I said. He looked back at the papers. "Okay." That evening, I finally called my mother. I want to be precise about why I called her and not him. I called her because I needed her to hear it from me before she heard it from anyone else. And because I genuinely wanted to see, whether she would do the right thing. Whether, faced with actual evidence of actual harm, she would choose her child who had been victimized over her child who had done the victimizing. I told her what I'd found. I told her about the 3 accounts, the $94,000, the fraud reports, the police statement. I told her I believed my brother had done this. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Claire, are you sure you didn't forget you signed something?" I closed my eyes. "Mom, I did not sign anything, because sometimes those online agreements, Mom." My voice stayed flat. "I did not sign anything. I did not open these accounts. My signature was forged. My identity was stolen. I have filed a police report. Another silence. Then, does he know you filed a report? And there it was. That was the question. Not, are you okay? Not, how can I help? Not even, I can't believe this. The first substantive question out of my mother's mouth was whether her son was about to face consequences. I'm not calling to ask for your advice on what to do, I said. I'm calling to inform you of what has already been done. She started crying. She said this would destroy our family. She said I was throwing my brother's life away over money. She said she knew I'd never truly forgiven him for the college savings, that this was really about that I'd been waiting for an opportunity. I listened to all of it. I let her say everything she needed to say. And when she was quiet, I said, I love you, Mom. But I am not dropping this. And I hung up. My brother called 4 minutes later. I didn't answer. He called 11 more times that evening. I didn't answer any of them. At 11:47 p.m., he sent a text that said, Claire, please just talk to me. I can explain everything. Please don't do this to our family. I screenshotted it and forwarded it to Detective Reyes. The next week was the strangest of my life. I went to work, came home, ate dinner, slept, and repeated, while underneath that ordinary surface, everything was in motion. The credit card companies were investigating. The detective was gathering information. My father called and left a voicemail telling me I was being vindictive and selfish, and that family works things out privately. I saved the voicemail as a file on my computer, labeled it with the date and time, and did not return the call. My aunt, my mother's sister, who has always been the one person in that family who sees things clearly, texted me on day 4. She said, I heard what happened. I just want you to know, I think you are doing exactly the right thing. Don't let them guilt you out of it. I sat with that text for a long time. I didn't cry until I read it. Funny how that works. I held it together through all of it, and then 11 words from someone who just said, I see you broke something loose. I let myself cry for about 20 minutes. Then I washed my face and went back to my list. On day 9, Detective Reyes called to tell me that my brother had been brought in for questioning. He couldn't share details of the investigation, but he confirmed the case was moving forward and that the evidence I provided had been very useful. He reminded me that it would be a process, that these cases took time, that I should continue to document any contact from my brother or my family. That same evening, my brother showed up at my apartment. I saw him on the intercom camera. He was standing at the building entrance in a gray jacket, hands in his pockets, looking at the camera with an expression I can only describe as rehearsed devastation, like he practiced it on the drive over. I stood in my entryway for a moment, looking at him on that small screen. I did not buzz him in. I texted Detective Reyes. My brother just showed up at my apartment. I did not let him in. Documenting for the record. Reyes replied, Good. Keep doing exactly that. My brother stood outside for about 10 minutes. Then he left. I've replayed that moment a lot since then. The version of me from 2 years ago, the version who still believed in the him he used to be, would have buzzed him up, would have sat across from him at my kitchen table and listened to whatever story he prepared, would have let the conversation go on long enough for guilt to get its hooks in, would have started wondering if maybe there was a way to handle this quietly, privately, the way my father said family is supposed to handle things. But I wasn't that version of myself anymore. Here's what I've learned about family mythology. Every family has one, and in every family mythology, someone has to be the steady ground. The one who holds still while everyone else spins. The one who can be counted on to absorb the chaos without adding to it. In my family, that was me. And for a long time, I thought that was just who I was, my nature, my role, something I'd been born into. What I understand now is that it was a job I'd been given without being asked, without compensation, and without any acknowledgement that it was labor. And the job came with an unspoken clause, do not make trouble, do not hold anyone accountable. Do not, under any circumstances, disrupt the peace by demanding that the people who broke something fix it. I worked that job for 31 years. I quit. The investigation took 4 months. I won't walk you through all of it because most of it was waiting for the credit card companies, waiting for the detective, waiting for the legal process to do what legal process to do with the pace. They've always done it. What I will tell you is that during those 4 months, I hired a consumer rights attorney who helped me navigate the credit damage, dispute the fraudulent accounts, and understand my options. The attorney was expensive. I paid her out of my savings, the same savings I'd been building for a house. That hurt in a way that was specific and personal, because my brother hadn't just stolen money, he'd stolen time. He'd stolen the 4 years of 6 a.m. weekdays and packed lunches and, not this month, that had built that account. I told my attorney that on our second meeting, and she looked at me and said, "That's exactly the kind of detail that matters in a case like this. Write it down." So I did. The 3 credit card companies ultimately cleared all 3 fraudulent accounts from my record. The process was not smooth. One of them initially pushed back, and my attorney had to get involved. But by month 3, my credit report was clean. The inquiries remained as a record of the fraud, which my attorney said actually supported the case rather than hurt it. By month 4, my credit score had recovered to within 12 points of where it had been. My brother was charged with 3 counts of identity theft and 2 counts of fraudulent use of financial instruments. I'm not going to tell you how the legal case concluded because it's still working through the system at the time I'm telling you this. What I will tell you is that there is a case, it is real, and I am cooperating fully. My parents have not spoken to me in 4 months. My mother sends occasional texts, not apologies, not acknowledgements, just weather report-style updates about neutral family events, as if we're acquaintances who fell out of touch. My father has said nothing at all. I don't know yet what to do with that. I think about it sometimes late at night, the way you think about a wound that's healed on the surface, but you're not sure what's happening underneath. My aunt calls every 2 weeks. We talk for an hour. She is the reason I have not entirely given up on the idea of family. Here is what I want to say to anyone who is watching this, because something in the title felt familiar. Because your family has a mythology that makes you the steady ground. Because someone in your life has said, "You owe us," or "It's your duty," or "We're family," and use those words to mean something different than what they're supposed to mean. You do not owe anyone your financial ruin. You do not owe anyone your credit, your savings, your name, your signature, or the 4 years of packed lunches that built your account. Love is not a debt that can be collected in the form of fraud. And a family that asks you to stay quiet to protect the person who hurt you is not asking you to keep the peace. They're asking you to finish the job they started. To harm yourself on their behalf so they don't have to watch the consequences. I know what it costs to say no to that. I'm paying it right now. 4 months of silence from the people who were supposed to be in my corner, a savings account that took a hit, a legal process with no clean ending yet. But I also know what it would have cost me to say yes, to call my brother back, to hear his explanation, to let myself be talked into handling it privately. I would have paid that debt for the rest of my life, in installments, and every payment would have made the next request easier to make. I filed the police report the same day I found out. I made the calls. I kept the records. I showed up to the station with a printed timeline and 12 months of documentation, and a detective looked at it and said, "You put this together last night?" Yeah, I did, because the stable one in the family, she's still here. She just stopped being stable for everyone else's benefit. The day I didn't buzz my brother into my building, I went back inside, made tea, and sat by the window for a while. The street outside was ordinary and quiet. Somewhere across town, my parents were probably talking about me. My brother was probably preparing a new story. The legal process was probably moving at exactly the pace. Legal processes always move. And I was fine. Not happy, not fixed, not finished, but fine. And for the first time in 31 years, fine on my own terms. That's worth something. I'm still figuring out exactly what, but I know it's worth something.